Okay, very good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I know that we had some delay from the previous sessions, but at least we have all come together into the room so we can start today's discussion on why green buildings matter, a stakeholder perspective. I would like to welcome all the guests that have been joining us in person today, as well as our online attendees. I have heard that we have a quite large number of people joining us from various countries, not only APAC countries, but also Europe and America. So wherever you are calling from, welcome for joining today's discussion. As a quick introduction, my name is Giovanni Cossu. I'm Italian, but I've been in Singapore for a long period of time, and I am the head of sustainability at CapitaLand Development. I will be your host and moderator for today's session. Before we start the discussion and the conversation with our guest speakers, we thought that it would have been an important moment for us to kind of contextualize the value and the creation of a green building. Given that today we'll be discussing why green buildings matter, we thought that we could have looked at CapitaLand's properties first, understand the kind of attributes, elements, features that have been defining the buildings that we have developed over the years, and then at the same time giving you a glimpse towards what the future holds. So we will be starting the conversation with a very short video by presenting this overview, and then after this we will be reconnecting to look at the conversation with our panelists today. Thank you very much. Enjoy the video.
What if we could shape a future where every element, light, water, air, plants, and people, becomes the very core of how we build our city?
I often ask myself, what would our city look like if buildings and nature could dance in harmony? One where every element of nature finds themselves woven into the buildings around us.
With rapid climate change, evolving urban landscapes, and economical complexities, we need to innovate faster than ever. So we ask ourselves, what would a greener tomorrow look like?
Over the years, CapitaLand Group has progressively developed innovative building typologies. From our perspective, we believe it's important that we see from the customer's lens. So we want to do things which are intuitive to them, that they can feel that it's part and parcel and is relevant to their daily life.
Light is the essence of our urban experience, adding a sparkle to our everyday lives. Water provides a peaceful retreat amidst the urban hustle. From shimmering ponds to cascading waterfalls, each drop springs new life into our living spaces. Plants are more than just greenery. They are the lungs of our city. They have the power to transform a city into a place where every corner is filled with life and help clean the air we share.
We believe that it's the people and communities that truly matter. Our ambition is to enrich lives and uplift communities. It's about doing the right things and doing things right. We advocate the one CapitaLand ecosystem, and it is important that we consider all matters as one system because we effectively cover the entire value chain and the creation process of any property.
A sustainable future is not one we could build alone. Standing together with our supply chain partners, we envision a low-carbon built environment.
It all starts from the beginning. From the careful selection of materials right down to the way we build, these form the green foundations to which our buildings thrive.
By targeting design and construction, we can influence not only the form of buildings, but the relationships between people and their cities, making sustainability enjoyable and pleasurable for as many people as possible.
This is our step towards shaping a greener tomorrow.
Okay, very well. I hope everybody has enjoyed the video that we have presented. This is just giving you some thought on what we are going to discuss today around the value of green buildings. So without further ado, I think we can start our discussion. Today we have 3 panelists, and I would like to invite our guests to join me on stage. Okay, so today we have 3 speakers. We have Maria Atkinson, Chairperson of the Board of Holcim Foundation for Sustainable Construction. Maria has joined us from Australia. Then we have Paul Sloman, which is Global Leader for Property, Science, Industry, Technology and Social Infrastructure from Arup. And finally, last but not least, joining us virtually, we have Henry Debranch. Henry, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, which is Executive Director, APAC, Head of Sustainable Solution at JP Morgan. So welcome, everybody. Before we start the conversation, as we have seen in the previous panels, we will be engaging the audience by looking at some of the inputs toward why green buildings matter. There will be a QR code that is going to be shown on the screen as also something that you have seen in other panels. Please help us answering the following question as soon as the QR code appears. What is the most important component you look for in a green or sustainable building? So this will be similar, as I said, to previous panels. We will have a word cloud where all the answers are going to be appearing on the screen, and the QR code is big enough now for all of you to scan. So this conversation will start by looking at green buildings under different perspectives. That's why we have invited different groups of stakeholders in our discussion. Maria comes from a policy and global level perspective, what it means on a global perspective, the value of green buildings. Paul, obviously, from a technical and scientific ground with Arup, and then Henry from an investment and also a property owner, a dual approach towards green buildings. So based on what we see on the screen, we have harmony with natural environment, energy efficiency, and energy savings. So again, it's quite similar to what we have seen in the previous panels around topics such as energy efficiency, nature-based solutions, and carbon. So it seems that most of the answers are gravitating towards these three components. All right, so let's start with a question around material risks. I think one of the key topics that has emerged from the previous conversation is how do we manage and mitigate risks? And given that we are in an environment that is definitely going towards more and more risky assets that have also the potential to become obsolete, then we will start by looking at material risks. Henry, I would like to invite you in this conversation first, given your role at JP Morgan. As investors and tenants are increasingly recognizing that sustainable real estate with strong environmental credential offer long-term value while reducing risks, what are some of the financial risks and opportunities that property developers are overlooking, especially from your perspective working with a diverse clientele at JP Morgan?
Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you very much for having me today. And I apologize to yourself, Maria, Paul, for not joining you in person. Let's just say I'm minimizing my travel-related emissions. So for transparency, we have the pleasure to be hosted in a CapitaLand property in Singapore. And it's an office that I know quite well, although I'm not there today. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk. So I'll speak briefly on the two aspects that Giovanni mentioned. So we are probably one of the largest banks in the world, if not the largest outside one of our Chinese PE in terms of assets, balance sheets, and then many other fronts. We're also a very large real estate developer, owner, financier, and occupier. So I think I just try to combine both aspects into my response. The physical risk are very prominent for us. We have offices in nicely wet countries like Singapore or Hong Kong, where I'm based, and much more arid parts of the countries. Many that are subjected to climate-related physical risk, typhoons, tornadoes, and the likes. We also have a lot of staff that travel to and from these facilities are subjected to all forms of climate risk. So that will be the prominent preoccupation on our mind, and something that we report, interestingly enough, across both our portfolio exposure, so the financing we provide to the real estate sector, but also our operational risks. So, and there's not always a correlation, but this climate risk and the physical risk of climate on both assets, our operations, and our people is evenly reported in our own disclosure. So we have a number of initiatives to reduce that. They're driven by our commitments from the top of the house. They're also in response to what our shareholders are expecting from us. As the intense dialogue on, what are the sustainability priorities, both in operational performance, so real estate related one that I just touched upon, and in the approach we have to providing the various very diverse financial services we offer our clients. So this dialogue happens within the board and management, and is reflected through the operations where I'm sitting in the banking side. In terms of priorities, we've tried to mitigate this climate risk by specific efforts. So where we own assets, we're focused on reducing energy use, and that's often done in collaboration with the landlords, developers that we rent space from, and with our own real estate team that oversees the assets that we own. So that's been a relatively successful journey, and it's somewhat easy. We've done that with direct energy efficiency programs. We've done that indirectly in reflecting with landlords in some jurisdictions, like in Hong Kong or Singapore, where we don't own the buildings but occupy some substantial amount of space. So there's been a bit of traction on that front. We also invest and support our clients' development of renewable energy around the world. We are a very large buyer of renewable energy certificates, RECs, and that comes into play both to support the greening of the electricity used in our own properties or those that we operate, as well as enhancing the value of renewable energy developers, because it's ultimately an attribute that's transactable and something that as a bank we are pretty good at. And finally, we are a very large buyer of carbon credits. So the market has been a bit challenged. Real estate sector has a substantial role to play in that. I heard nature-based solution earlier. It takes many different forms to achieve sustainability. So we buy about 250,000 tons a year of carbon credits in addition to all of the programs. So this is a form of de-risking of our operations, and we've got targets for ourselves. We measured our operational footprints and defined targets in line with climate scenarios. From a financing perspective, I really like the idea of looking at systems, and we are not exclusively focused on real estate. We've got clients in that real estate sector, we've got clients in the energy sectors, we've got clients in the construction material sectors, and that gives us a little bit of a privileged view and a system approach. So the major risk that we see in the broader pursuit of sustainability and how we as a bank can achieve our own targets and support effectively our clients in achieving their own targets is that when times get a bit tough, and honestly I do feel that the pursuit of sustainability in the financial sector has been revisited a number of times in the recent few years, and there's very different regional or even national approaches to it. It's losing this perspective that there are systems, and a system-based approach is certainly the most beneficial in highlighting the sustainability performance of a single company or even asset.
Thank you, Henry. I think I would like to go back to this question of systems, something that has also been discussed in the previous panels, particularly from a city perspective. And I would like to mention one of the properties that Henry highlighted is Capital Spring, where obviously there was a level of sophistication in design and engineering solutions. So Paul, this probably leads you back to how we are transforming the way in which the programming of a space or even the planning of a project that is going beyond a certification level is currently evolving. And a company like Arup has the potential to look at this across different markets, different geographies. What kind of innovations is Arup, for example, bringing on the table on this aspect?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Really pleased to be here as well. After so many years of working with CapitaLand on, and Capital Spring as a project in particular. So, I mean, as an organisation, we're looking at lots of things. And when I take a journey back, some of the things we were asking of our clients to think about, well, 30 years ago, we're only just now applying. In terms of, we could do net zero property 20 years ago, but nobody would commit to it because of the perceived risk and danger. Like, what if the market doesn't accept it? What if people don't like it? Where's it been done before? Well, it's not been done anywhere before because it's the future. We'd like to think there are so many areas that we're looking at, like the decarbonisation of the supply chain, working with glass manufacturers, facade aluminium producers, concrete producers, steel producers. that whole Scope 3 decarbonisation of the supply chain. We're working with the supply chain to help them. And it's interesting. Like, I think I did a count this morning. Scope 3 was mentioned 3 times. Now, in my world, that is the biggest challenge and opportunity for the built environment. Look at the CapitaLand building footprint globally. The embodied carbon that you're responsible for, locked in, is colossal. You already own it. You can't discharge that ownership. So what do you do about it? So, and what value do you create from it? So, I think rather than specific sort of innovation technology, and we know how to give you net zero, we know how to make buildings more energy efficient. You've got to operationalise that. You've just got to do it, and it's being done. And you're fortunate in a position at the top end of the market where you are doing that. Our opportunity is helping the lower end of the market, trying to achieve how to do that in a programmatic and cost-effective way. And then it's like the next real challenge and opportunity for the industry is how do you decarbonise the construction industry and the material supply chain industry. So, back to the theme about cities. The leading cities in the world, London, New York, Los Angeles, Copenhagen, the planners there require you to do an embodied carbon assessment of what's on the site before it was part of your development application. And you have to account for what you would do with that carbon through the process of deconstruction or demolition or enhancement. So as a designer, it's a fantastic opportunity. We've got a new variable to play with. Scope 3 carbon as a design variable we've got design cost, you've got time, you've got net to gross efficiency. Now we've got Scope 3 kilograms of CO2 per square meter as a new design variable. So we will make different decisions using that variable than we would have done without it. And that's exciting, but it's also challenging. And what I hope will happen is that the way that buildings look and operate will not be the same as they are now. And that skyline will change the way that it looks because there's a new variable. What will it look like? Not sure, but chances are we can probably design it for you.
Yes, Scope 3 is definitely a Pandora's box. When it's open, you don't know what comes out of it. But it's an interesting conversation because, as you said, it also opens windows for opportunities, right? On untapped markets or areas where probably the industry is not 100% clear and where you can take a leadership position on a certain aspect. In this case, Maria, I know that there has been, you have been involved in the green building movement, and the way in which the Scope 3 conundrum is now changing, obviously, is also changing the way in which green certifications are going to be adapted. adopted. So a significant portion of our current built environment was developed before building certifications and the concept of green buildings was even developed. And this is leaving us with a legacy challenge of existing facilities. So how has the definition of green buildings evolved over time? And particularly, what type of new directions are emerging now for sustainable development across the building life cycle?
Thank you, Giovanni. So it's a big question. They're all big questions. I think I'll take the last bit of it. Only last year at the COP was the built environment and the building and construction sector included in conversations. For 25 years previous to that, it was a separate conversation. Countries are now, next year, having to deliver roadmaps of how are they going towards their 2030 targets, towards their 2035 targets, in order to meet their 2050 net zero target. And countries are realising that the sector that has the most solutions available to it now and the carbon opportunity is the built environment. So when the green building movement started, it was broad. It was all about nature, energy, it was about health and well-being, and it had a kind of structure to it that was for the design community to come and collaborate. Because until the Arab model was proposed, an engineer and mechanical services would prescribe something that was quite efficient in their mind, but it was actually for the hydraulics engineer a real problem. It was water intensive. And perhaps it was using a high emitting or a global warming potential refrigerant, and no one had thought about that. So the green building movement was coming together to share mainly around developers and designers to get specifications and collaboration occurring. What's changed now is that the green building movement is an asset class where finance can go into to deliver environmental, social outcomes, as well as, I think, being a saviour for governments in getting their low carbon abatement sooner than they would have otherwise in a sector that's actually ready. So there'll be more regulation, more focus on that. I hope that answers the question in a macro sense.
Yeah, I think this is also related to the correlation between factors in the built environment. There are a lot of times discussions around operational carbon. Operational carbon is directly correlated with green energy. So the transition towards a greener grid definitely helps that, the decarbonization. For Scope 3, the decarbonization is linked to green materials. So as the supply chain changes, then there is a direct correlation to you in reducing your embodied carbon. So I think that's where things are correlated. And in this case, Henry, I would like to go back to your dual perspective as a property owner and also as an investor. Again, just looking at Scope 3 from your perspective as indirect emissions sources, what kind of strategies is JP Morgan taking or addressing in order to basically reduce those emissions, if any, and to what extent? Harry, I think we cannot hear you.
I think it will help if I unmute myself. Sorry, Giovanni. I think Scope 3 mean very different things for very different people. For us, Scope 3 are largely our financed emissions. So very different from what Paul was highlighting as at the core, the questions and progress in the real estate sector in particular. I would just say, like, the value chain perspective we have. So as a financial institution, we've committed, not unlike what Maria mentioned, targets in 2030 and obviously a net zero ambition by 2050 across our financing portfolio as well as our operations, of course. So the sectoral approach that we have touches upon some of the industries or sectors that Paul mentioned. We have set carbon intensity emission reduction for the steel sector, for the cement sector. We are not a regulator. We are not applying our view of the world to our clients, but we've set them at a portfolio level, first expressed in the form of intensity. So we want to accompany our clients in their sustainability journey and steer our capacities, our financing, our intellectual capacities in helping clients raise finance and engage with investors, so both balance sheet and this investment banking services we offer, toward achieving these targets. And so we have these industrial verticals that have been quantified in terms of targets and approach, which we believe is reflective of the state of play. We're trying to bring all of that together by working with multiple clients across different sectors. When it comes down to the real estate sector and this scope 3, which goes toward this upstream construction materials and the like, we can hopefully benefit from the experience we have working with developers, understanding their needs, benefiting from understanding what investors are looking for when they invest in real estate, as well as working with these construction material companies. So we're trying to bring all of that into play. So we'll talk about a sustainable value chain or the sustainable storytelling that we collaborate with clients on shaping. The accounting for scope 3 is very challenging. I'm an environmental engineer by training. I spent the last 20-something years doing much more menial work that the trends have brought sustainability into in the last days, but it has given me a bit of insight. I think scope 3 is an eternal debate, and I don't think it'll ever be solved, because there's unlikely to be any agreement with the GHG protocol and industrial players of different countries, etc., to land on a perfect and scientific agreement on the topic. But there's a lot of initiatives and there's a lot of manners to create partnerships to drive performance. And since sustainability is a lot about performance in a practical ways, and I'll call that almost benchmarking rather than absolute performance. The system approach and the correlations and the partnerships that drive value creation is a better form of expression, especially if you go to face markets, than a pure play scope 3 quantification that ultimately will then become a quite intensive topic to administer and challengeable.
Thanks, Henry.
Can I just sort of add to that? Henry's absolutely right. There is no global protocol for scope 3 yet. It's a brand new language that none of us are fluent in yet. So, when you're trying to learn the language, it's pretty clumsy, right? But the main thing is you have a go at learning. You start to talk in that language, and you listen to other people talk in that language, and they're not fluent either, but at least they're having a go. So I think as engineers, we get tied into how precise is the data? It isn't precise. It isn't, and it never will be until we start to adopt it fully. And it will be precise in maybe 10 or 15 or even 20 years' time. It's not precise now, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop trying to learn the language and talk it and apply it. And I think that's what we should all be doing. You've got to be brave about it. Otherwise, nothing will change.
So there is a solution. A standard was released only 2 weeks ago, the E-Liability Institute. So I'll say it again so you can write it down. E-Liability Institute produced the first accounting standard for carbon. It's based on the need of the European Union, who's going to introduce a carbon border tax, and how can the country of Fiji offer services or products to Europe and be also assessed against an American company providing services or product to Europe, and therefore the need for individual accounting. The principle, the breakthrough controversial principle, is it's only scope 1 and scope 2. If everyone did scope 1 and scope 2, there is no scope 3. CapitaLand is not responsible for your tenants' emissions. That is their carbon footprint. So breaking up scope 1, scope 2. But I agree with the gentleman before me in that we need to understand the impact of the products and materials and services that we procure and make decisive decisions to reduce the emissions from those decisions we make. And therefore, in the construction industry, we need to work with the industrial and waste sector and, in fact, the gas sector to be able to come up with alternate products and materials that make our buildings structurally sound and have low carbon embodied outcomes.
And I think this is leading us to the question of who pays versus who benefits, because that's something that is also related to the scale of project. When you operate and you work in an environment where the value that you create is within a site, a construction site, that's a very narrow approach. But then the larger your site, whether you go towards neighborhood and even master plan, then you are impacting the urban fabrics, right, at the same time. So for this kind of project, Maria, this is also following what you just said. You create a value, a benefit that goes beyond the developer responsibility, because it goes towards community outcome, of which the government is caretaker. So then the question is, who pays versus who benefits? A developer, is it responsible to pay for the creation of a value that goes beyond its own responsibility as a developer?
Well, I'll start by saying you have to have a good governance structure and strategic planning way before investment and development is even factored in. And if cities don't have the governance and the strategic planning, then everything is reactive, right? But finance wants to find places that deliver social and environmental outcomes. So there are sustainable linked loans that have as much social and community outcome as they do environment. And so finance needs to find these projects. But a developer, in inheriting a piece of land, to change its land use has an obligation to the community to do the very best. And there are things within the constraint of that site that a developer is absolutely responsible for. But is a developer responsible for the city's strategic community outcome? Absolutely not. And I think there needs to be some pushback on what is the developer's role and responsibility within their capacity, and understanding in a community, and the community demanding more of the government in strategic planning. That's me being slightly controversial, but it's a little pushback. But at the same time, if I'm inheriting or going to occupy a building, I want it to be one like this. I want it to be integrated, connected. I can get public transport. I can see nature. I can connect with nature. All of those things. I'm in a healthy space that's got 100% fresh air, etc., natural light. All of those things are key as community contribution within the site. But you also have to connect your site to other things.
Yeah, 100% agree with all of that. You know, a building that's socially integrated, environmentally integrated, you know, city integrated, is more desirable. And doesn't that make it more valuable, ultimately, and more resilient, ultimately, to valuation changes? And so it's like it's a self-fulfilling circle, a virtuous circle in a way. Good design that, you know, adds to social value. Adds to the fabric of the environment that it's in. You know, people will you know, humans react to beauty and nature and all the things that we try to provide in green and sustainable buildings. So it's not, we're not just doing it to save the planet. You know, it has a planetary saving value, but also we're doing it to make it desirable to human beings. And you know, in my experience, the best design buildings that perform really well, that have all those attributes, actually rent for most. In the longest term, they retain their value the most through all the ups and downs of the whatever valuation cycles there might be. So I'd say, you know, it's not a payoff, one against the other. It's a virtuous sort of equation that provides social value. You get a payback in desirability and ultimately value to your business.
But this is a question also to both you and Henry and Maria. When you create social value, I think the problem in this case is the language that you create in quantifying it. Because there is not standard per se, which is globally recognized. And when you do not have that global recognition or quantification, then it's difficult to also justify it, no? Compare, for example, to embodied carbon reduction. It's a number, it's a percentage, it's clear. Or when you go towards a social value, then there are areas which are still in an exploratory stage and also a lot of assumptions, which I believe will create still some form of not clarity in the market. I'm not sure what your view is, Henry and Paul, on this.
Yeah. Henry, do you want to go?
Oh, yeah, no, the disparity in value creation, value is often in the eyes of the party that holds the money. Yeah, they ultimately define what the value is. So if you look at it from an investor perspective or a financial service provider intermediary such as ourselves, it's really very much in how you're telling the story. As a occupier or real estate developer ourselves, and I speak very much on the sideline of this treaty, but we've flowed a lot of money in developing our new headquarters in New York. I'm speaking a lot of money even in terms of massive real estate development. It's been, from the banking perspective, it's been an amazing experience because we've actually been in a place where we've been able to test a lot of our principles, our goals, our ambitions. We've not only talked to architects, but we've gone out to the manufacturing facilities of supplies of different types of steel and glass, to understand better what was actually coming into the composition of this building. It's allowed us to become familiar with new companies and to onboard new clients. It's also challenged our perception of how sustainable some of our existing clients were, because we found providers of such material that were a lot more advanced on their journey. So it's been a very interesting experience. It will certainly be a legacy for the current chairman and CEO to have built such a massive new structure in the middle of New York. But most of our colleagues, when I speak to them, don't live in Manhattan. They live in New Jersey. They live in here and there. So sustainability has really brought us to figure out, does a family of 5 want to live in Midtown Manhattan or not? So from the bank, as in the physical building owner and occupier, the bank, it's a never-ending debate on where's the sustainability-driven value created in this decision that we've taken. But we are plowing through, and it's certainly have multifaceted benefits. From a financial service provider's perspective and investor's perspective, quantifying the value creation is very important. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about how much greenhouse gas emission has been saved, or the evolution of emissions from year to year, sustainability reports, etc. There's standards, and Giovanni, I'm sure you're very familiar to those with like GRESB, etc., that have actually driven performance. So there's one thing about expressing performance and expecting value to be attributed to it, or they're driving performance and being recognized for the ensuing financial value creation. And that's really in the hands of the people who can craft this messaging in a language that touches government and influences where the legislation is going, the developers' strategic thinking, the banks that they appoint to support them in their financing, provide them balance sheet or support them in capital market activities, and the investors that contribute. This storytelling is, I think, the crux of the value creation element.
Yeah, I mean, you can't quantify the future with certainty, right? So quite often in real estate, we quantify the past. There's loads of data, right? But it's all historic, it's all yesterday. As we look to the future, without the ability to quantify with absolute certainty what the future is going to be, requires a little bit of bravery at times. You want to do something different. Intuition, creativity. So if you want to create a different future, you need all those attributes. You can't just rely on the data. The data's not going to tell you the answer for the future. It might provide some signposts, but then thereafter, the human beings. I'm an engineer, highly technical, lots of numbers, but I have to make judgment calls on ultimately what the design might be possible, particularly when we're innovating. So I think if you want a more progressive, innovative real estate sector, be braver, be more innovative, take some chances. Okay, maybe don't take a chance on a new $1 billion development, but perhaps take one on $100 million development. or a $50 million development. But do something different.
So, may I interrupt, Paul? Having the same background as you and spent part of my life in a company very similar to yours and sitting where I am, in the financing world, we call that scarcity value. Right? So, it's not so much as performance, it's this scarcity value. And when sustainability becomes a key element of scarcity value, then financial value and support for the initiative on this $100 million or $1 billion development materializes.
Interesting way of approaching green building, scarcity value. How do you quantify scarcity value? I think this, Maria, goes back to your roles on non-governmental and governmental organizations. How can you comment on the role you see policy and industry playing in unlocking green buildings, and how can we ensure that both work in tandem towards this goal, also by addressing this scarcity value?
Thanks, Giovanni. I'll start with where I think the next 5 years is, which is taxonomy, where money wants to be placed and it needs to be placed in a simple way. So your building's energy efficiency, even if it's an existing building with some of the legacy issues you said, it needs to get to top 15% quartile performance in energy efficiency. Passive design brings in the elements of creating the fastest way to get to efficiency, and then if you have artificial heating or cooling systems, comfort element comes into that. But then the electrification. So we need to electrify buildings. And so even the diesel generators, etc., we've got to get off all of that, 100% electric. At least 60% of your roof needs to be photovoltaic solar generation. At least 60% of your roof. So the on-site generation. Decisions you're making today about global warming potential refrigerants, we need to get to natural refrigerants. Most plant and equipment lasts 15 to 25 years, and the global warming potential of refrigerants is a big issue. So decisions we're making right now on choices of refrigerants are key. Then moving along, we've got this whole element around embodied carbon and circularity, and that is in new and exciting dynamic spaces. But this is critical to what is it that we want to see in a green building. And I'm focusing on carbon just right now. If we go to nature, including nature in it, this is cohabitation. So a shiny glass facade might be great for the lighting, but it's not so good for bird strike. So no night light spill. The facade needs to manage the bird strike and integrating nature into the building. It's not just plants. It's the fauna that thrives with the plants. People want a connection in nature. City polling says that about 80% choice, if you ask the average person in an average city, they want more green. Now, I know in Singapore you may say we've got enough, but in every other city in the world they want more green. So this integration of nature I'm seeing as a key element. For me, they are the priorities of green building, not forgetting health and well-being. So we're in this environment right now, very different to the speaking environment before. So would you like to live in this environment with the bright artificial lights, no vision of outside? We naturally know that this is an environment I'm going to spend a small amount of time in. I would much prefer to be living in the other environment, Giovanni. So I think those social indicators and the health and well-being are going to emerge and come also into this carbon and nature discussion around taxonomy. Singapore has a good taxonomy. The European Union has a good taxonomy, though only Spain and Germany have them validated. The next 10 years, you're going to need your projects to validate the environmental and social outcomes, validate the outcomes. That's the next 10-year wave. The Australian taxonomy under development is further than the EU taxonomy, so I'd be looking at that as a wave of new things that are required in green building. But to me, they're the priorities of the next 5 to 10 years.
For this, I would like to follow with you, Paul, on what Maria just mentioned, which is the buildings that we envision in 5 to 10 years from now, they are low carbon, high health. So what kind of new solutions is Europe looking for? For example, I have heard of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and this concept of circularity now becoming even more critical to the point of creating a foundation to this level. Can you tell us a little more about this?
Well, Ellen MacArthur Foundation originated really to try and create circularity in the domestic waste product. So Ellen MacArthur's around the world, she sailed around the world single-handed as quite a young woman. And she saw a lot of plastic waste in the ocean, and she said, oh, I want to do something about that. So, so she's done a lot about that, and she's, significantly improved the way that plastics and the like are collected and repurposed, so on and so forth. So the next sort of thing was like, what else can I, try to make circular? And she looked down, which is the slowest evolving sort of business economy. Well, construction's pretty poor. Maybe, we could do. We got, as we know, the built environment is mostly built. And it regularly gets repurposed, torn down, whatever. But the recycling of the componentry, the carbon that's already there, and all the materials doesn't really exist. It still really doesn't. So it's part of that work is about, well, how do you make what use do you make of what's already there, and then how do you start to design new buildings so that they are actually more circular. You consciously design for deconstruction. You consciously design for how much of each component material type you've got in a building. You account for it, and you manage it through the life until you return it to whatever purpose we've invented for it. In 20 or 30 or 50 years' time. So that's what that is about. In terms of adoption, though, like the European Union is by far and away the most advanced in terms of its circularity thinking. Hence, what Maria mentioned about what did you say? The carbon products coming into import. Yeah. So that's the thinking. Now we need to get to the adoption. So again, it requires a bit of learning, and then ultimately for people that have an impact in the supply chain that specify it, start to specify that level of circularity and carbon performance in your briefs. And we are starting to see that and work with clients, say, well, okay, if you're going to do a development, this should be your embodied carbon target, this should be your circularity component, this is the way you should start to approach it. And then you start to push it down the construction chain, and the contractors will then push it down their supply chains. And then if the legislators are pushing the other way, we should start to see some faster change.
And that's the reason why we have decided in the title to change from why green buildings matter to put green in brackets, because basically that's where the world is evolving. Even in our conversation with the Urban Land Institute, they were telling me that in Europe now, it's no longer green financing, it's financing. So if you want to tap on financing, then the green doesn't exist anymore. So now we are not talking about value of green buildings, value of buildings. Green is already the minimum standard that you have to achieve. So I see that we are at the end of this discussion. It's been a quite interesting conversation. I would like just to ask you one final question, and then after this we will wrap it up. If you can give us one trend that you feel is going to be the key component in the design and construction industry over the next 5 to 10 years, which one will be? Maria, we can start with you.
Wow, one key trend for the next 5 to 10 years. I would say that the built environment will receive much more attention and therefore much more funding that can go into delivering solutions. I think that the electrification of the grid will take longer for countries, and therefore there will be renewable energy zones in urban environments, and we will have real estate developers playing in the energy markets in a way that we haven't seen before. So I think that is one trend that will then drive efficiency and all those other outcomes if you're maximising how much you can trade with your building portfolio.
Yeah, to your point, Giovanni, energy efficiency is green in brackets, done. We know what we've got to do, just do it. Come back to scope 3. It's the adoption and management of scope 3 emissions in design, construction and ownership.
Harry, if you have one final thought on this.
No, so Giovanni, I will completely concur with your point. So strangely enough, well, not strangely, but JP Morgan is the largest underwriter of green bonds. But its market has been battered, or that has shrunk particularly in this part of the world. So the inclusion of real material, sustainable language and performance is really what's coming to the forefront of the investment community today. Investors are not particularly excited by a green label on a financial product. The pockets of investments have already been fulfilled. They're really looking for what is driving transition and how well they can understand that, adopt that, structure portfolios around this. And I think the role of the entire value chain of a developer being able to demonstrate partnerships with suppliers of materials that have a practical impact and present that not as an element to put a label on transactions, but as fundamental to the growth and strategies of an issuer in a capital market, for example, is becoming the language that's taking shape now. So I will diverge from taxonomies. I agree with Maria that they're very important, but not necessarily to structure products and label them, but really to shape the thinking, merging the financing strategy with the operational strategy, with the development strategy of and the sustainability pursuit of different players in the market.
Okay, thank you very much for this lovely discussion. It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with like-minded people that have same objective and same long-term goals. So please join me in thanking our guest speakers today.